The Loop.
The Loop. You have the divine spark. The Loop.
Do or do not. There is no try.
The Loop.
Give me your roar.
Hey there, I'm Misha, and welcome to episode number 3 of The Loop. Today's guest is Ridhima Khurana, who is a product manager and has worked as a PM for many years at leading tech companies like Facebook, Google, Flipkart, Yahoo, and a bunch of others. And through her time in these organizations, leading and coaching people, she has obviously progressed quite far. And one of the secrets to her success has been her ability to push back, whether that's pushing back to a teammate or pushing back to her boss, different stakeholders, vendors, et cetera, et cetera. So today's conversation is all about the art of pushing back and saying no. So when I think about a career or anyone's career and how to grow in your career, I think a lot of people would say that, you just need to get really good at one or two things and just like focus on that and get those skills, whether that's, marketing or engineering or sales or whatever it is. But a missing piece of that often isn't spoken about is this communication aspect and, being in the driver's seat of your own career to really push yourself forward and call the shots and not just do what other people want you to do. And a lot of that comes down to just being assertive and pushing back. And this manifests in many different ways, and it's really difficult for a lot of people. It is difficult for me sometimes also. And Ridhima gets into why this is challenging, why it's important, and like really practical stuff on how to have this conversation when your boss wants you to do something and like you don't want to do it. How do you have the conversation with them? How do you push back? How is that different with a teammate? And a lot more around that topic. So if this sounds interesting to you, then I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation today. All right. Well, without further ado, I will cut to the next scene. Hey, Ridhima, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Misha. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to your heart, the art of pushing back and saying no.
Yeah.
And before we jump into that, it would be great to get a little bit of context into why this is important for you and sort of how your career has brought you to this realization. So could you share a little bit about your career up until now, and then we can go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a product manager for almost 15 years now. And one of the things I've realized that as a product manager you need to do is prioritize, right? And prioritization means saying no to a ton of things that are great for the other things that are going to be better. So I basically learned the art of pushing back and saying no to cross-functional partners as part of the job. And I realized as a manager myself of product managers and other people that, saying no is such an art because it helps you not only be a strong professional, be a strong product manager, but also be able to chart your career growth, right? There's someone out there who's telling you that you need to do A, B, C, and it's okay to ask why and say no because it's your career. So it's really about being able to take control of your career, get into the driver's seat, and know when to push back so that you can take control of your own career growth. I mean, I've been a manager for a really long time now, and I hate people who are yes men, who are just gonna say yes to everything because I don't know if they're challenging me enough. And I also don't like to work with people who say no to everything. So there's a fine balance. And really it's about knowing where to draw the line.
Got it. Yeah. So that's some good context. So you've been a product manager at big tech companies for a long time now. And I think as a product manager, my impression is that you do have to work with a lot of different people and there's a lot of pushback and you have to give a lot of pushback. So it seems natural that you would need to do that in your role. But are you saying that you think it's also equally important for any sort of position?
For any position, because you're always,
for anyone.
Yeah, because you're always working with people, for people, right? Like, there are instances where you might have to push back on your manager because they're asking you to make certain changes in the way you perform, and you may not agree with it. Or they may give you a lot of work that you may not feel very passionate about. And, you just need to know where and how to say no and, disagree, but in an agreeable fashion.
Got it. Yeah, so I think it's interesting because when you ask people, so just in the context of career growth, right? When you ask someone or read some stuff online about how to grow in your career, I think one piece of advice is you need to be really, really good at what you do. You need to just double down and get better at this skill, right? And pushing back or communication maybe is part of that, but then the impression that I have, and think a lot of people have, is like, well, just get really good at the marketing piece or the engineering piece, or become an expert in that field. But we don't really think about like this communication or pushing back as being like a huge part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Misha. I think everyone does that, and I think that's table stakes. You need to be really good at your job. But I don't think that's all that is required to grow in your career. I think there's a lot more that you need to do to be able to grow, because there could be a lot of people really good at their job, but not everyone becomes director, senior director, VP, and CEOs, right? And so you really need to know how to work with people to be able to grow in any company.
Got it. Yeah. So let's dive into it a bit more. So what does it really mean to be like pushing back? Yeah. And you also call it the art of pushing back. And I wonder, is there a science part to it? Is there some process you can follow? So talk to me about like, what is your definition here of pushing back? Like, what is it and what is it not?
Yeah. Look, it's definitely an art and a science of pushing back. I think the art is about how you deliver it, but it's definitely a learnable technique. There are multiple frameworks out there that people use to be able to push back correctly. Today, I'm just going to share a few that have worked for me to say, when you should push back and how you should push back. I will caveat, though, that, to push back, the first thing you need is credibility. If you don't have the credibility with the person you're going to be pushing back on, it won't be taken very well. So that is table stakes, right? Like, come from a place of credibility, come from a place where you already have a track record, so that people take what you say seriously and there's respect.
Okay, so if you're coming in, if it's your first week on the job, then you shouldn't just be pushing back to everyone.
Exactly.
I guess that's sort of obvious, but I guess at what point do you gain credibility? I guess you just sort of have to sense that.
Exactly.
Over time.
You'll have to sense that over time. Like, do you feel confident in your own abilities? Do you feel that you've done enough to prove your worth? Do you have a track record of successes? Do you feel that you can gain the trust of someone who you're pushing back on? Because no one likes to be pushed back on. It makes it easier if you're getting pushed back from someone who you respect. Right? Because now you're coming from a place of credibility, subject matter expertise, a strong track record. And so when you push back, it will be taken with a lot more positivity.
Got it. So maybe step one before even pushing back is like, make sure in that context with that specific person or company that you have some credibility. And if you don't, then you just shouldn't be pushing back yet, and maybe should be focused on doing the work or building the relationship or whatever it might be to strengthen that.
In most cases, yes. I think it's very important to just kind of, learn the work, learn the company, learn the culture, do well, have some small wins under your belt before you can go all out and push back. In other cases, there might be instances where you absolutely disagree with something. And in those cases, it is still okay to push back, but know that it won't be as effective as if you had that credibility and history.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, in my case, for example, I joined Meta in 2017. I was there for about 3.5 years. And um, I actually wanted to join. I wasn't interested to join Meta because I had done so much work in large tech firms. I wanted to actually join a startup. But there was this recruiter who was incessantly after my life to interview, right? And I kept saying no, and I kept saying no for the longest time, till I finally gave in. And that's another skill, right? Like to be persistent, not to give up. Like kudos to the recruiter to not giving up and following up with me for over a year to interview. And she really, when she came to me, what I learned is that she didn't come to me with saying, hey, can you interview? You should interview. You'll be a great addition to Meta. She actually tried to understand where I was coming from, why I didn't want to join Meta, right? So I told her that, hey, I'm looking at smaller companies. I want more autonomy. I want to do something a little bit more exciting than being in a more bureaucratic, large company. And she came back to me with roles that were more startup-y within Facebook, that had, that still didn't have enough resources. It was like a startup within a large company with the resources of a large company. And she convinced me. So one of the skills that I learned there was that, when you hear pushback from others, actually try to make it a situation where you're working with the other person, right? Instead of just giving up. So that's another skill that I think is very important, that you will be pushed back on as well during your tenure at companies. And don't just always take no for an answer. Try to understand where the other person is coming from, so that you can actually work together towards a solution. But to cut the long story short, I joined Meta into this whole new startup type of role. And 6 months later, the team dissolved. And the team dissolved because it didn't get the right resources. It didn't basically fly. It was something that got deprioritized within the company. And so I was left without a role. Right? At this point in time, I was in a position, and during this entire 6 months, it wasn't easy, right? Like to be in a position where you've just been hired and every other cross-functional partner is actually against the existence of this team. Right? There were people who didn't think that this team needed to exist. There were people who weren't passionate or didn't sponsor the vision of the team. There were people who didn't want to put any money behind the team at all. And there were very few people who actually wanted to do something in that area. And eventually the team did dissolve over 6 months. What really worked for me at that point, every other PM actually left the company. I was the only PM who stayed at the company and actually built a successful career in the 3.5 years that I was there. And I actually give credit to my ability to be able to push back and my ability to be able to understand the larger picture and actually be curious rather than defensive, just because I was hired into this role. So
what do you mean? So after the team was dissolved, you're saying that your ability to look at the greater picture and sort of push back
exactly.
lets you sort of stay longer. What do you mean by that? What happened exactly?
So what exactly happened was that there were actually 3 teams who were doing the same job. And there was basically a fight for who should own the scope, right? We were building a whole new team with very little subject matter expertise and context. A lot of us were actually joined from the outside, just like me, right? On the other hand, the other 2 teams have been in Facebook for a while, and even though it wasn't, the work that they were doing wasn't part of their official charter, but they were still doing it. So there was obviously a clash of the titans sort of a thing going on, that, oh, this is my scope and you should not be touching this, and these are my customers and you shouldn't be building this product and all of that, right? Now, instead of being defensive, which a lot of other PMs, more junior PMs did, right, where they were like, oh no, I was hired to do this. My manager told me to do this. I'm going to build this product. I don't care how I do it, but I will do it, right? I actually try to understand the bigger picture and see where they're coming from. And actually what they were saying made sense. Instead of being defensive and fighting for scope, I actually collaborated with them. and said, hey, you know what, guys, you're doing a really good job at this already, but you're doing it with 1/10 the resources you need to actually build everything that you want to build. Why don't I come and help you, right? I don't need to take the credit for the job. You be the product manager, but let me help you build this so that we can actually solve for the customer need that you're hoping to solve with very limited resources. I have the resources. Let's build it together. And I think that really made the flip, right? That kind of changed the entire dynamic between these 2-3 teams that were fighting for scope to say, this team has the resources, my team has the expertise. It's better to just collaborate rather than just fight on where do we draw the line, right? It just changed the entire conversation from where do we draw the line on which team does what to how do we build this together to bring in our roadmap from 1 year to 6 months, right?
Got it.
And
so the lesson, maybe just to pick that apart, is that I guess in this case you were being pushed back on, and then you were doing some pushback also, but you reframed it to, okay, if someone is pushing back, if someone does want something, then reframe it to how can we collaborate on this together, instead of, what does this person want?
Exactly.
Sort of thing.
So here really, if you think about it, I didn't have any credibility. So I didn't want to be the person who's going to push back. I saw the perils of people who were doing it, and it didn't go very well. So I didn't want to be the person going out there fighting the fight and, fighting the philosophical fight to say, this is where we draw the line. You should be building this and I should be building that. And this is how the org should be divided. It wouldn't work. I have zero credibility in this company. So I can't come with authority and say, this is how the org should be structured, right? Those people have been doing the job for so many years. I really don't have the credibility to build that. Instead, I focused on building a relationship with them. And I think that's super important, that you should be able to build a strong relationship with someone in order to push back on them, right? I was able to build that relationship with them. So I was able to push back at a later stage saying, hey, you know what? Instead of doing this with 5 engineers, we should actually source this with 10 engineers and do it the right way and not the hacky way. And they took me now with seriousness because I had that relationship and that credibility with them after spending that time with the team. Right? So build the credibility, build a relationship before you push back. And I think just get curious, right? Instead of being defensive, I saw the perils of people who were being defensive because they were hired to do a particular job. I was more curious to see, hey, why are the teams pushing back on this team to exist? What is the history behind it? Why do they not want this team to exist in the first place? And I think that really helped me shape the conversation and build a narrative which was more collaborative in nature. So I think 3 things that I learned is build your credibility, build your relationships, and don't get defensive at the first go. Instead, get curious, try to get a bigger picture, and it almost always gives you a better sense of why certain things are the way they are.
Yeah, that's really insightful. And I'm wondering, this is a really sort of almost dramatic example, right? When people are leaving, and so I think it's quite stressful, and you're coming in at a new time. So you were still able to sort of pull through, which is great. I wonder, do you have any other instances or other examples where it's more just on a day-to-day basis, right? Where your boss says something, your colleague says something. Maybe you've already built some trust with these people.
Yeah. But
it's just the day-to-day pushback where maybe you're not really a pushover. Maybe sometimes you push back, sometimes you don't. But there's still some perhaps fear, or maybe you're just a nice person. I don't know. There's some fear of pushing back. Why is that? Why is that fear there? Talk about that a little bit.
Look, a lot of people have a fear in pushing back because you fear that you're going to cast a doubt on your own abilities, right? So if your manager comes and tells you, hey, I need you to do XYZ, this is an urgent ask and you need to get it done right now, right? Many people will just say yes because you don't want your manager or your superior to think or to cast a doubt on your own abilities, right? Others will say yes to cross-functional needs because you don't want to come across as someone who's non-collaborative or not great to work with, right? And there's always this fear of letting people down around you, right? You always want to overachieve. You want to do what's best for the company. And the easy way to do it is to just say yes. And very soon, many yeses will lead you to a place where you just don't have enough time to do the most impactful work that you were hired to do. Because now you're doing so many other people's work and just saying yes to everything. And really what I've seen, I was part of this problem, right? I had that problem. And I've actually seen in my career, women tend to have this problem more than men in general, where women will just say yes to a lot of things that I've seen men at the same level wouldn't. And so I'm generally more passionate about actually training women to just know that it's okay to say no. It's okay to ask why. It is your career, and if you're not on the driver's seat of your career, no one's going to lead you to where you want to go, right?
Sure.
So it's absolutely okay to ask why. There's just an art of doing it, so you don't come across as someone who's hard to work with, right?
Yeah. Can I push back on that idea actually?
Yeah.
So when I look back at my career, so I was a recruiter for a few years, managed a small team, and at least when I was starting out for the first year or two, I remember that my biggest opportunities and times where I felt like I leveled up came from me saying yes a lot, right? So that phone call would come in, I was late in the office, and I would be the first person to pick it up and say, yes, I will work with this client because why not, right?
Yeah.
Even though it was more work. Or when a colleague would need help, I would say, yes, I will help you. And that helped me build my trust and credibility. So from one perspective, it seems like saying yes and helping people and sort of building trust and saying yes to opportunities could actually help you really progress in your job. And I think that's what probably a lot of people feel. And that's how I felt at the time. What am I missing there?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it makes sense to say yes if you actually think it's going to help you in your career. Taking that extra client call is going to help you build credibility. Absolutely say yes. Doing that extra work that your manager puts on you is going to help you build trust with your manager. Absolutely say yes. But doing that extra work because your manager thinks it's urgent, but you have 10 other things that are super important as well, and it's going to jeopardize that, say no, right? Because it's going to jeopardize the 10 other things that are absolutely critical for your success, right?
Okay.
Or
that's a good example. Just the last thing you just said. So walk me through that. How would you do that? So you've got a bunch of stuff that you need to prioritize, and then your boss comes in and says, or whatever, it's a Zoom call or Slack message, and say, hey, can you please do this? And there's not too much context. What is the first thing that you could do in that situation?
Ask why. And it's okay to ask why. Hey, I understand that you need this, it's urgent. What are we trying to do here, right? If a good manager should ideally always give context, but it's not always the case, right? So it's okay to ask for a quick context, to say, hey, is this urgent? How urgent is it? Why are we doing this? I have these 5 things that I'm working on. Is it okay to deprioritize these 2 things so that I can get you this? Right? And in that case, you're not working against the manager. You're really not pushing back on the manager. You're working with the manager to say, is it okay to deprioritize these 2 things so I can get this done? Right? And, think about it as the problem of scope and effort, right? And then impact, right? So
okay,
it's all about ruthless prioritization. And if someone, and you're doing prioritization on a daily basis to say, I have these 8-10 hours a day that I want to work on, and I'm going to work on these 5-6 things. If someone comes and jeopardizes your target to say, okay, instead of these 5-6 things, can you do these 2 things? It's very important for you to know that if you do these 2 things, either you work extended hours and get that out, or you're actually going to give up on something. And it's very important to be able to communicate that with your manager so that you can have a more collaborative conversation around it. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's, if it's not a habit and you want to make this into a habit, starting really, really small. Like that's a situation where it's, it's the stakes are pretty low.
Yeah.
Right. Just asking why. How can you make this, like, what's the starting point for someone who wants to try that out a bit more in their
I'll give you an example,
work.
right? I had this manager. She had this habit of just putting things on me without even on all of us, all the reports, without really asking us, telling us, giving us enough context. She would just go into a large meeting, commit things on our behalf, and forget to communicate. So we would get to know from other people that, oh, by the way, your manager signed you up for XYZ, right? And it was becoming a habit, and it was happening very often. So one of the things that I did, that I kind of figured a way that works with her is, it doesn't work with her to say, how can you do this? It doesn't make any sense. Like, it wouldn't work with anyone, right? Instead, you would lead with, hey, by the way, I heard you said this. I did a little bit more research. I took your lead on it. You were spot on about this. I took your lead on it, and I did a little bit more research. I wanted to give you a little bit more context so we can decide if this is something, if this has legs, if we should invest time in it. And if the answer is yes, here are the two things that I was working on already. Is it okay to deprioritize those? These are the three things that I cannot deprioritize because I've committed, and these are the things that we've committed to the larger leadership. So now suddenly, instead of saying, this doesn't make sense, why did you commit on my behalf? How could you do this? You're basically saying, hey, what you said makes a lot of sense. Here are the things. Here are the things that maybe we need to consider. I took your lead on it and did some research. And more often than not, once you make it into a, hey, I'm on your team, I want to help you, so help me help you, right? That kind of just changes the way people work with you as well.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And then how is it different when you are perhaps pushing back to your boss versus a teammate? Do you change your approach there?
It really depends from situation to situation. It's a lot more constrained when you're pushing back on your manager. It's a lot, I think there are a lot more variables when you're pushing back on your teammates. Because generally, I mean, at least at companies like Google and Facebook, right? Large companies, you have a lot of cross-functional dependencies, right? Like my team to get my product out will have to work with 5 other teams, and I'll have to influence all of their roadmaps so that I can get my product out, right? And in those cases, it's very important to be able to push back on things that are not supremely important, right? Like everything is important, right? Like what's important for team A may not be the highest priority for my team, right? Because I have a much larger scope, or vice versa. So I think it's such an important art to be able to push back so that you can focus on the most impactful things, right? And my strategy with pushing back with teammates is generally, how can I help unblock you, right? I understand that, you want me to do this, but really you don't want me to do this. There's a goal that you have, right? How can I unblock you in the short term? So for example, there are teams that used to work with my team. I was in the ads team at Facebook, now Meta. And we were essentially responsible for building advertising products for small and medium businesses. Now you can imagine the number of teams that are going into building that, right? Like there's a delivery team, a targeting team, a ranking team, a ad creative team, and so many other teams, an AI ML team that are dependent on us to be able to ship their products out for small and medium businesses. And we would get 1 million requests to be able to work on their feature. And you can't work on every team's every priority. So there's a very ruthless level of prioritization that you need to do. But you also don't want to be a blocker, and there's a limit to what you can push back on. So what I would generally do is, hey, you know what? Let me. I know I can't do this for you, but I understand that this is the problem you're trying to solve. I can't do this for you right now, but what if I do A instead of B, so you're unblocked in the short term? Why don't we plan for this so that you can combine this feature with another feature and make it more impactful so it can get prioritized, right? So I would essentially work with them instead of just directly saying no, Like no is a complete sentence, but it's generally not a complete answer. I generally would say that, right? So no but or no and is generally my approach that I would take with my teammates to say, hey, not now, no, not right now, not this, but I can give you this. So you can get unblocked.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot because, I mean, at the end of the day, you don't have to have a great reason. You can say yes or no, but it's really helpful, especially if you're trying to work with these people every day and build a relationship, to say no and these are my thoughts, or no, but let me provide this piece of information. It could be helpful. That way, you're still giving them something, and you're still saying no, but still maintaining some semblance of like I'm helping you somehow.
Exactly. It really doesn't have to be like a disagreement doesn't have to be negative. That's how I've seen it, right? It's okay to disagree, but you got to give a solution, right? I've seen a lot of times actually as a manager, when I'm giving feedback to my reports, right? People would, and they wouldn't push back. So I actually train people to say, hey, you know what? If you don't agree with the feedback I'm giving you, push back. It's all right to push back. I have received feedback that I don't 100% agree with, and I've pushed back on my manager for it. So one of the things that I've actually realized that when you're getting upward feedback or when you're giving downward feedback, one of the things that really helps is go with the solution, right? Hey, here are the things you're doing really well. Here are the things that I don't think you're doing very well. And I wanna help you get there. And here's how I will help you. That instantly reduces the possibility of getting a pushback. When you're initiating a conversation where you think you will get pushback, it's very important to go with the solution.
Can you sort of unpack that a little bit? So what you're saying is that, okay, you think that this is not going to be a popular idea. You think you're going to get some pushback. So put some more thought into it and like map out the potential rebuttals and like share some more. Like what do you say exactly? Like what's the structure there for? Do you have any examples?
My structure is very simple. I always start with, hey, this is going really well. I want you to continue doing this, right? This is not going well because of ABC, right? Give clear examples, talk facts, right? Give actual statistics to say, hey, you did this in this meeting. This is how people perceived it. I knew this was your intention. This is the feedback I got. I want you to get better at it. This is how I will help you get better at it, right? And make it real time, right? I think it's one of the worst things. It's very easy to get pushback is if you give feedback 6 months later, right? And a lot of people do that. People are scared to give feedback to their to their reports, to their colleagues, to their cross-functional partners, because they're just worried that, it's, the person's not going to agree. I'm just going to get pushback that I'll have to deal with. I don't want to deal with that. So I'm not going to give you that feedback. That is a pure recipe for failure. So make it instant, make it real time, and just make it factual. I think that makes it very easy to have the conversation more objectively when it's factual, right? And especially if you know that there will be pushback. I think it's very important to put some thought into the conversation before you have a conversation if you know that the other person will push back on it.
Yeah. And then do you recommend, so you say real time, you mean to make it timely, obviously don't do it weeks or months later, otherwise it sort of loses its relevancy and urgency. But do you do a lot of the feedback on like video calls or in person, or a lot of it on Slack or email where you can sort of write down the data and like map it out if there's some more data involved, or a mix of both, or what do you recommend?
Look, everyone has their own style. I would hate to get feedback on Slack. It's like someone breaking up on Slack. So I would prefer to do this in person, like in a Zoom meeting or in person. And that
guilty as charged. I've definitely done that. So like I should I'll take this advice.
Yeah, I mean I would. So look, I treat people the way I would like to be treated. I wouldn't like to get constructive feedback on Slack. I mean, if it's really simple, like hey, by the way, this I thought this didn't go well. in a meeting and
Yeah.
it's super small and it's easy to fix,
Yeah.
sure. But if it's something that, if you really want the person you're giving feedback to improve and to actually do well, I would say take the time, right? Make the effort. It just shows that you care to just take out 15 minutes and give that feedback to them, either on Zoom or in person.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So I don't do that.
I think that conversation is, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just saying that I don't do that, but I know people who do that. So I wouldn't like to receive feedback on Slack, so I wouldn't give it.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things there, right? There's just the fear of giving the feedback or pushing back, and you've offered some solution to sort of the structure there, where start with the solution and really think about it before. Don't just make it a purely emotional act, even if it is initially an emotional sort of act. You want to think through it a bit. But what would you say to people who, they are nervous about doing it in person or over a call? They're afraid that their coworker might get upset, or they're just not confident about phrasing it properly. I guess that's the art part of it that you're talking about. Do you have any advice around that?
I think the more factual you make it, look, you need to come from a place of caring, of really caring for the person to succeed, right? Whenever I give constructive feedback, it's never to put that person down. It's always to help the person actually grow in their career. A lot of times people just have blind spots, right? I had this person who used to work for me, and he had the habit of just cutting people out, right? Super smart guy, strong credibility, super knew his job in and out, really good at his job. I got to learn a lot from him, but just had the habit of cutting people out, right?
What do you mean cutting people out? What do you mean?
Like when you're talking and you would just cut people and just start talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And would do it. And, I had other people in my team who were introverts, who were a lot quieter. They had really good points and they had a lot of things to add to a conversation, but wouldn't, because this person would just kind of rule the room, right? Just take control of the room, be the person who will talk the most, not give others a chance to talk. And it works till a certain level, but after a while it gets noticed as not being a team player, right? You're not letting others talk, you're not collaborating with the other person. Now I was worried, how do I give him this feedback? Because he's so good at his job. He's showing all the results. He's launching products left, right, center. His product sense is spot on. He's really good at the job, right? But it's important for him, if he wants to grow further, this is going to actually hold him back, right? Not only in my team, but in any other team that he goes to or any other company he joins. This is one thing that's going to hold him back. So I actually come from a place of extreme care and responsibility for him to grow in my team. And that's how I phrased it, right? I first set the context. I said, look, these are the things you're doing really well. I learned so much from you because you're doing this, right? You're really putting a great light on me because you're performing so well. And I want to promote you. I want to put up a case for you. But in order for me to do that, I need A, B, C, D, E. And here are the areas where you didn't show me that skill, right? I need you to show me a skill where you can actually bring people up, coach people, train people. And I'm not seeing that skill right now. Tell me how you can show me that skill. And after I heard his ideas a little bit, I said, and I think here are the 3 other ideas that I have, and I want to help you get there. So we actually created a plan, and it went super well because now he knows that I am not coming from a place of pointing fingers, but I'm actually coming from a place of extreme care.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And there's just even if you're not a manager, right? It's like the amount of effort you're putting into thinking about it and sort of mapping it out. And again, it's coming from a place of care. You want to help the other person, but you're just you're thinking it through. And I think a lot of feedback, especially if it comes real time, people will just say it. And it's whoa, what do you mean by that? and then that's where it gets a little bit contentious because you haven't thought it through, and then you're like, oh shit, well maybe that's not what I meant, and then you start hesitating to share feedback again or push back again because you haven't put in the time to really structure it and think it through like you should. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think giving feedback is somewhere you should just expect the other person to push back. So it's super important to go well prepared so that the pushback is easier to handle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And why, I mean, so just going back to, so we started talking about feedback now, but going back to just this idea of pushing back and you actually pushing back to a manager or a teammate. You said in the beginning of our chat that this is really important to progress in your career. Like, I guess the opposite situation would be like, if you don't push back at all, then you're just not going to progress as fast. Do you have any examples of that, or what do you think really is at stake? Like, if someone is just not putting their foot forward and speaking their mind, what is really at stake there?
Look, I think, I know for a fact that as you grow in your career, it's very important to be known as someone who actually has a mind of his or her own, right? That you actually know what you're talking about and you're not scared to ruffle feathers as long as it's the right thing to do for the company and for the goal that you're hired for. And that becomes extremely important as you grow in your career. If you're going to be growing in your career to like a director, senior director, and higher up, it's so important to know, how you want to build your org, what type of teams you need to manage, what kind of metrics you should be taking on, what kind of people you want to hire, how big your org should be, what culture you want. And all of this requires you to push back at some point or the other. And if you don't know how and when to do that, it's very hard for you to grow, and to grow vertically and also in just a more wholesome professional who can actually coach and lead other people, right? And I think just lastly, if you're pushing back for a reason, and that means that you've taken control of your career. If you don't push back on things and if you're just doing things because you have to, who's really on the driver's seat of your career, right? Where is it going? Do you know what the destination is? And are you working towards that destination? So I think that's a question you need to ask yourself that, hey, I want to get to this XYZ level, or I want to get to this place in my career. And if I'm just going to do everything that everyone tells me to, are you really working towards that, right? Are you taking the shortest possible route there? Are you taking the route that will help you grow, develop most? Or are you just letting other people chart that route for you?
Yeah, no, that's very true, right? If you are not in the driver's seat, people are they're driving you around, and you have no say in it, right? Exactly. So eventually, you have to take the wheel and take control. One question I have, maybe shifting gears a little bit, is just on job interviews, because this is something you do some coaching for job interviewing for tech companies. And do you see this play a part in preparing for job interviews? Like, are people who are pushing back in interviews, do they do better? Right? I mean, my image is like, if you're pushing back to your interviewer, then that's maybe not a great thing because they're there to ask you questions. So it seems like there's probably some fine balance there. But talk about that. Like, do you have anything to say around sort of pushback in the actual interview process for a tech company or anywhere really?
Look, pushback I think has just received a negative rhyme to it for some reason. I mean, I've had interviews where I've pushed back, and it's really just about telling your story, right? Like, I've had people tell me, like I was interviewing for Sofi, for example, for a director level role. And one of the things my interviewer actually said is, hey, you have a great story and you have all the skills we need. My worry is that you've not done pure play consumer products, right? Because I was building ad products for advertisers, right? At this point, I could say, oh yeah, you're right, and just like shut up about it. Or I could push back and say, actually, that's not true. I actually think that I have all the experience required to be building pure play consumer products, because if you think about who a consumer is for Facebook, if I'm building who an advertiser is for Facebook, it's a mother who is just doing recipes. She's not really a business, right? Or a young college grad who has a page with memes, and that's the person I'm building products for. Now, if you think that product or that customer is actually a business, then sure, I don't have the experience. But I actually think that they're all consumers, and I'm building business products for consumers. Now, you can say that this is a pushback. I actually think it's a clarification, because that actually helped me get the job, right? And I actually followed this up with saying, I am not worried about this. What I am actually worried about my performance is I don't have fintech experience. And that's where I think I'm going to struggle. And that's where the interviewer was like, oh, don't worry about it. I think we don't need pure play fintech experience. Actually, what we need is someone who comes in and knows pure play product management and can build that culture in the company, right? And that's how we kind of worked through it.
Yeah, I like that example. Like, it's interesting though. So your response to him was pretty logical, and you had a specific example. Like, actually, this is what I did, and it is actually relevant to consumer marketing, a consumer product. Where is the line between being defensive and then pushing back? Because I think if you didn't have that reason and you were like, no, I do have that experience, that would just be sort of a defensive.
Exactly.
It wouldn't be pushback, right? Exactly. It would just be defensive.
My suggestion is defensive is never the right answer, right? If you're being defensive, you're letting your emotions rule your reaction. Instead, you want to be curious. You want to know where the other person's coming from, right? Like in this case, I knew where the interviewer was coming from. He was actually coming from a place of concern that I may not be able to build the right product management culture in the company if I don't have consumer experience building consumer products, right? And I was just trying to solve for that, and also giving my opinion on where I think I will struggle, where I will need someone's support if I join the company, right? So I think never be defensive, right? Like it's very easy if there was someone else in this place and said, oh, I think this is a problem. Very many people will just succumb to it and like, oh yeah, this is a problem. Or they'll overcompensate for it. Like I've had people who have interviewed and they overcompensate. When I say, I think this may be a problem, or, this is where I think there's a gap. And people will overcompensate to say, oh, no, don't worry. I will learn this and I will do that and this and that. And really what you want to say is, you're right, this may be a gap, but here is how I think I can make it work. Or here are the other things.
There's honesty. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't be defensive, right? Like try to understand where the other person's coming from. And and then come to an agreement together. Maybe what the other person is saying is true and it may not be the right fit for you. And that's absolutely fine. Yeah. I've had so many places where I've interviewed a candidate where I didn't hire the candidate for the role that I was interviewing for, but because they left a memorable impression in my mind, I referred them to another role that I thought was a better fit for them. And they got hired in that role. So, it's a process. Like when you're interviewing, it's not just the company interviewing you, you're also interviewing the company and the role. And you want to make sure that there is the best fit there. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like you would be a scary interviewer, but also you'd be lucky to have you because, if you do have a good conversation, if you're not the right fit, then you might still refer that person. So that's really good to know. You don't know what's going to happen in the interview. You don't know what's going to happen if you take that coffee meeting, casual coffee meeting. It could turn into a job, could turn into a referral that gets you a job, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, really interesting. So I think we covered a lot about this topic and also a little bit about the interviewing side. Is there anything else that you would like to share from your experience or that you've seen that you think could be useful around pushing back at work?
My only advice is that it's not all, you're not, when you push back, you're not saying no, you're just giving a different yes. So focus on that. Focus on giving a different yes rather than saying no. And when you do that, you're most probably working with the person and it just helps you get to a better outcome.
All right. Yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap up, and I will link back to your coaching profile in the notes. Do you actually? I know you do a lot of coaching on interviewing. Do you do any coaching actually around pushback, or is that part of what you do?
I actually do coaching around interviewing, and I also do coaching around just like getting people, level up in their careers. Pushing back is one of the skills I teach, but I do it more in a more personalized fashion with people. So they can kind of give me what the situation is, tell me what's happening. I understand, what the whole ecosystem in the company is, so that I can give more clear advice on what's the best next step. And pushing back is a large aspect of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it touches on a lot of areas.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Ridhima. Well, thanks so much for
Yeah.
your time, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah. Thank you, Misha. This was good.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
All right. I hope you thought that conversation was useful, interesting, practical. Maybe you got some takeaways that you can use in your next conversation that requires some pushback. I will link back to Ridhima's profile, her coaching profile. So if you are interested to talk to Ridhima, or if you want some really specific coaching on interview stuff, product management interviews, obviously she's a seasoned PM, so she can help you on that front, or on this career aspect of how do I have this conversation with my teammate or my boss, how do I be more assertive at work, then you can definitely have a chat with her to talk more about that. So all right, well, that's about it for today. So hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.